You step off the Great Plateau and there's that first opening shot where you see the entire map. I almost cried. Like, I'm not even joking. I was just like, wow, this looks awesome. You just open up, that's the first thing that you see outside of like the dark cave.
Yeah, you just met with sunlight and then this vast open expanse. You see those mountains over there? You can climb them. It's glorious. The fact that they've been able to make this seamless world is really impressive, considering what came before, which was Skyward Sword, where, you know, like all of the areas were so limited and disconnected. And in this, there's so much more of that interconnectivity on the macro scale and the micro scale, if you consider like the fact that you can go into houses and everything is still flowing. Loading is really only present within shrines, usually, or when you're warping. It kind of makes sense that they need to load that type of stuff, but just exploring the world is seamless, and it is amazing.
When they announced that Miyamoto, whoever, he says every player will have a unique experience, and it's like, okay, yeah, sure. But it's actually true. Like, you can even do the exact same thing totally differently, because everyone comes up with their own solutions to problems.
The interactions that they've built in to all of the elements in the world, how they interact with each other and your runes, like stasis and magnesis and whatnot. There's so many combinations, they create totally different stories. That's the kind of thing with sandboxes. There's an infinite amount of possibilities, basically.
You think a sandbox like Minecraft or Gary's Mod, it's not the same, because, I don't know, with Zelda, it's not unlimited, because it is limited to the point where each player can come up with their own solutions. Some people might use, like, magnesis to lift a box. Other people might use stasis.
Or they might just blow up a box with a bomb.
Or they might just,
I think that's why it's so enjoyable to watch, because if I'm watching someone play a shooter, I know what they're going to do. But watching someone play Breath of the Wild, it's like, ooh, are they going to throw that box? There's so many things that can happen.
So many variables. I really like the changes that they made for this game. Getting rid of the rigid item system and the durability system, I think it's a good change. But there's a few things with the implementation that I find not the greatest. The fact that there really isn't a way to tell how many hits you have left on a weapon. There's a slight indication in, like, items flashing red in your inventory, but that's basically it, and there's no real way to tell. As well, like, when you're out of weapons, I mean, it does instill a kind of vulnerability, basically, and the game at the start is kind of a challenge. Enemies can one-shot you. Like, it's not as handholdy as Nintendo games have been in the last several years, especially Zelda games, and how they, you know, implement, like, the Sheikah stone thing that can give you hints as to what you're supposed to do. Like, yeah, there are people that can give you hints, but you still have to figure it out. I really appreciate the fact that they respect your intelligence for the most part. The Great Plateau is the greatest example of that. It is a micro-scale version of the entire game. There's the area like the Cryonis Trial that you can go about in several different ways to survive the cold climate. The areas themselves are puzzles in the way that you can figure out how to get to them in different ways. Traversal is the name of the game. Traversal tied with the exploration factor. You see something off in the distance and you want to know how to get to that. They've taken elements from Skyward Sword and made them much better, or they fit much better, like the stamina system.
Oh, the stamina system is beautifully integrated into Breath of the Wild.
It is,
I wouldn't change a single thing about it. It's honestly perfect, and the fact that you can advance it with the soul orbs as a choice as opposed to getting more health, to me that's just a perfect system, because you can either say, okay, well, I want more health to deal with enemies, or you can say, I want more stamina to run away from enemies, or I want to be able to climb more. Then you go all stamina like I do.
Yeah, the stamina system is really cool, but then another thing that they took from Skyward Sword was the paraglider, which a lot of people might have forgotten that was Skyward Sword that started it, because it was so...
That was a Skyward Sword thing?
Yes, it was, and it was not good at all. Like, the thing with Skyward Sword is that you'd have to dive to your locations with the bird, and there'd be a prompt to use your paraglider at the right time, but you didn't even need to press B at the right time. You weren't even given the satisfaction of Link breaking his legs, you know? Like, it was just automatic. In this, you gotta time that stuff, and it's so much more integral to the game, you know? You climb to gain altitude, and then you paraglide off. They're intertwined, those two actions. The climbing system is so integral. It's the one aspect of the game that I find is the most unique. Even though in other games, yes, you can climb, but not to the extent that you can in Breath of the Wild. Like, pretty much everything is a climbable object.
I do wish sometimes that they're more entertaining, because sometimes it feels just kind of like a waiting game. But I think it's good that you almost have to gauge your stamina and stuff. I'm more talking about late game when you have like unlimited stamina, basically. It becomes quite boring.
The side effect of the climbing being so prevalent is the obsolescence of horses, because horses are kind of like, they're there, but for most of the game, your traversal is vertical.
I've played a little bit of Morrowind. I played it before Breath of the Wild, and it was alright, but like, you can't climb up cliffs. You can barely walk up cliffs. And that makes you feel like, well, you can go down, but then you have to find a way to get back up, and it's super long and it's annoying. And like, you're in the valley or whatever, and you see a dude, and you say, oh, well, I guess I have to fight the dude or turn around and go back, because there's no other way out of the solution. With Breath of the Wild, if there's a dude in a canyon, you say, okay, well, I can either fight this dude, take his weapons, or I can just climb up the mountain and just leave him and go on my merry way.
Yeah.
Which, for someone like me, who is not the most combat savvy, it helps a lot. And it makes the game a lot more enjoyable, where you could go the vast majority of the game without ever having used your weapon. Some things that I don't like about the game, I remember when I started playing it initially, I was just like, this is the best game ever. There's literally nothing wrong with it. But as you start to progress in the game, there is a lot of repetition that happens, both visually and game-wise, which in a game like this, where everything is so free and open, that's not very conducive to the game style. So the thing that sticks out most to me is the shrines. There's 120 of them. They all have the exact same textures, the exact same music, and they all feature the exact same characters, really.
Going into a shrine, I find that oftentimes the puzzles feel a bit too flat. I think because of the way that you're limited to your key items, like your key runes, it kind of lessens the amount of stuff you can do. Because like in the open world, there are so many objects and elements to interact with. In shrines, you're much more limited. Once you realize what objects interact with what runes, you can basically figure out 90% of the shrines. Each of those that aren't tests of strength, which there are a ton of, and I find are the most samey. It's kind of a shame, because I was looking forward to that, the whole aspect of mini dungeons around the world, but because the shrines are so obvious, I guess, you see a shrine and like, you know what you're gonna get out of it. You know, you might get like one puzzle and you'll get a spirit orb out of it. What I was expecting though was them to be more integrated with the world, having actual cave systems. Whenever I would see like global rocks, I was expecting them to lead into some kind of cave system, but they always just lead to like a chest or like a Korok seed, perhaps. And that was it.
The thing with the shrines is, in the beginning, they're really entertaining, but it gets to the point where once you're in a completionist kind of mindset, it becomes such a chore.
Yeah.
The thing is that, like, the whole idea of this ancient monk dude has sat for the past 100 years or whatever, waiting just for you, I was like, whoa, this is some heavy stuff. And then you see it again, and you're like, oh, whoa, this dude too? And then you get off the Great Plateau, and you're like, oh, this guy did too. 50 shrines later, oh, another monk. 120 shrines later, you're just like, yay, I got a spirit orb. I can finally have that complete. Oh, there was a monk?
They should have made the backgrounds and textures of all the shrines different for different regions. Like, they had those elements in the shrines themselves. They have lots of puzzles, but they needed to change it up to be away from the stupid blue.
Even the DLC pack, the Master Trials are actual biomes for each of the levels. There's more unique geometry in those, like that actually harken to what the game is actually like. The shrines, they're mostly cubes, or like very harsh edges to the shapes. It just seems like they're not really that distinct visually because of the angular nature of them. It's just a function of them not using natural elements in them. I guess to contrast with the rest of the game, like this is the puzzle section. The whole spirit orb thing, I think this is a nice reward because like it functions as a piece of heart or piece of stamina.
Piece of stamina.
You know? Yeah, both are useful. It gives you some motivation to do shrines, but at the same time, I felt like a lot of the treasures that you find out in the world aren't really that substantial. Like, they're crafting materials you can use, but like, it was a thing that made me kind of averse to a lot of the side quests because a lot of the rewards weren't too substantial, or rather that most weren't. And the few that had like armor sets to them, you couldn't really distinguish whether or not a quest would give you an armor set or not. What happened to me was that I just avoided any side quests to begin with because of how the ones that I encountered were so lazily designed, I thought. You know, they're just like, oh, get 10 of these things. It's like, Majora's Mask had probably the best in the series, I think, in terms of the side quests. Partly that was due to how the items that you got were more significant.
A lot of the mechanics that went into side quests in previous Zelda games, like in Majora's Mask, where you have to do things at a certain time of day for that to happen. In order to find a shrine, you have to be at a certain thing at a certain time of day. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
It goes into finding the shrine, but once you get into the shrine, it's, again, like you said, the same reward every single time. And it's nothing new.
You brought up shrine quests, and some of the shrine quests were good. There were some that were like challenges in the Gerudo Desert, where you're holding this huge ice block and you have to take it from one point of an ancient ruin to another. It's in broad daylight, and so it's gonna melt. There's like enemies that can breathe fire, so you have to stay in the shadows so that it'll melt slower. And then there's the whole gut check rock, just climbing to get rupees. There's certain ones where they're kind of like mini games almost, that I found were really cool. Some you kind of had to decipher what they meant, and sometimes they could be very confusing. There's the one in the Zora's Domain where you had to like stab the shrine pedestals
with a waterfall,
with a trident.
Yeah, that stupid trident. I couldn't find it anywhere.
Yeah, that was annoying.
There was this one shrine crest, and it was like this rock that was constantly under torrential rain and thunderstorm, and you have to get these orbs onto this raised platform. 2 of them were already on the platform, but the other 2 were not, and there was no like stairs or anything to get up there. And for the life of me, I could not figure out how to get the 2 orbs up. It took me like hours to figure out what on earth I was supposed to do.
That was a really good one too, because you had to figure out how to get these bulbs up in the courtyard or whatever, and you had to find them, you know, as well. Like
and that was frustrating, but I guess that was frustrating in a good way.
Yeah, that I found was really good because you had to think about that kind of stuff. With the shrines, a lot of the times the puzzles are very simple, so the quests kind of fill in usually for that aspect, but some of them are not the greatest, like the Salmon Minier quest, where you have to make the freaking salmon for the Rito children.
Rito!
I hated that.
That was...
It's just like, that stuff's not good, but Eventide is the best. The beginning of the game really is the better part of the experience, because it kind of does get into a bit of a chore when you're out trying to complete everything. And plus, as you gain armor sets and you gain new modes of defense, it becomes a lot easier. Stripping that pretty much all away, or like just your armor and weapons that you've gotten so used to using, it was just a really nice change of pace. And I'm so glad that they modeled the Master Trials after that concept. One of the reasons that I didn't like how the side quests were clumped together in the menu, there was the main quests, the shrine quests, and then the side quests. And one of the side quests was the Kakariko village one. You have to do 3 things that are marked down as side quests, but then they lead into a shrine quest.
Right, yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was cool, but there's also no way of telling that these really insignificant things that you're doing would even lead to something like that. You have to chase the Cocos and put them in the pen, and then you just gotta like gather fireflies for a person and release them in their household, and it's like, then it leads into the thing.
I'll be honest, for a lot of the stupidly hard stuff, I just looked it up. Like, that has always been my mentality with Zelda games, is I run into a problem, I try it, I can't figure it out, I look it up.
I did that as well, at least for the shrine quests, never for the shrines themselves. Shrine quests, on the other hand, they're really specific parameters that you'd have to resolve that were kind of cryptic.
To be fair, some of the side quests in Majora's Mask are incredibly cryptic, and you wouldn't even know what to even do if you weren't, like, following a guide.
That's true as well. The actual story and how it's presented, the memories, you have to go looking for them. Trying to track them down is a fun thing in itself.
Yeah.
The first part, they're out of order. You're kind of having to piece together the events that took place before the whole 100 years of Link being asleep. That aspect of it is cool, but the actual champions, and Zelda as well, I didn't find all too developed or interesting.
There is one exception. I agree that the champions overall, they could have been developed a little more. Mipha, there's that whole, like, relationship with Link thing that was set up.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess there's that, but I don't know. It was alright, I guess.
It wasn't expounded upon much, so...
No.
They all had their quirks, but there was not much else to them.
Daruk.
He's the tough guy.
He's the tough guy. That's him. Urbosa, it's really hard to get a good read on her for whatever reason. But the one exception, who I will defend to the end of time...
Rivali!
You guessed it!
Rivali.
Rivali
What a
is
guy.
the best. I love him so much. If he had only existed in the one cutscene with him and Link, I would be happy forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw that and I was just dying hysterically because every other character in the series has always been like very like stoic or serious, or like if they're funny it's like a haha I'm Tingle funny.
Yeah.
Then you get this guy who's just like straight up, no, I think that I am the best and you are in fact not.
Kind of snarky, basically, and his superiority complex is quite enjoyable.
I'm not saying he's unique, because he is straight up copy-paste Falco, down to the colors and the fact that he's a bird.
Yeah.
But I still enjoy him greatly. Out of the champions, he definitely is the most characterful for me. He is the one that like stood out, which is really kind of sad because the power that he gives you is like, I use it and it's helpful for like traversing maps, but like Daruk gives you an overpowered shield. Urbosa gives you like this weapon that can allow you to like one hit pretty much everything. Mipha gives you a revive, and then Rivali just gives you some wind.
Raleigh's Gale breaks like half the dungeons.
Can you even use them in dungeons?
In Divine
Hold on,
Beast you
yes.
can. Yep. Divine Beast you certainly
Oh,
can.
yeah, actually, speaking of Divine Beasts, they are essentially the closest thing to dungeons that the game has to offer, and they are on the level of shrines, I think, in terms of how much I really enjoyed them. Maybe they're a bit above the shrines, but not by a whole lot. They are very formulaic. With other Zelda dungeons, yes, there was literally the Zelda formula for them. And I was just kind of upset that they didn't want to break those conventions a bit further and make it a bit more non-linear. I don't know. You can technically activate each terminal in whatever order you want, but it just gets to a point where it's just so repetitive that that's all you're doing. There's no substance to any of it.
And it doesn't help that all the divine beasts are the exact color scheme, so you run into a similar issue of the shrines. I love the concept of it, like these roaming beasts that are part of the environment. They're actually moving around the map when you're doing
That
stuff.
is really cool.
That's super cool, yeah.
Especially for like Palmetto.
The bird?
Yeah, the bird. That's like super cool because you're like above the clouds and flying over the map essentially. I love that. What I don't love is that you can't climb around in these dungeons because the material, and that again, where the game is so heavily based on climbing, it's actually really restrictive in a bad sort of way. Like I want to just climb all over this thing and like fall off and laugh hysterically as I fall to my death.
It's so clear that they got inspiration from Shadow of the Colossus when designing all of the divine beasts. But in Shadow of the Colossus, climbing is an integral part of that game as well. It's weirdly absent in the divine beasts. It's very strange.
The first beast that I did, like most people, was the Zora one. And the way that you board it, it's like super cool because you've got Sidon, who is also the best character in the game.
Sidon is amazing.
You're having to like take down these ice blocks as they chase you, and then you're having to launch these electric arrows into the beast, and you're like, whoa, this is such a cool way to board this creature. And then you move the trunk, that's cool. And then you go through the dungeon, and then you beat the boss and all that. The next thing I did is I went to the Rita one. You've got this guy who you're flying around with, and you shoot arrows at it, then you board it, and then you do the same thing.
Yeah, just the way that you get to the beast, there is some variation.
There's variations with Varudanya, but other than that,
yeah, well,
almost
like,
exactly
say, with the whole
same.
Yiga clan infiltration, there's that stuff as well, preceding the Divine Beasts, that I found were good. The repetition also comes in the form of the bosses, which were extremely disappointing. Zelda games have had really iconic bosses. To see that all of them are just variations on canon, there's nothing that's interesting about them.
Visually.
Yeah, I don't understand. Majora's Mask had the same number of dungeons, but each of the bosses were
unique.
Well, I mean, they're memorable. I don't get why that aspect was not given the biggest amount of attention, perhaps? I don't know.
Obviously, the whole thing with Breath of the Wild's bosses is that it's less so than last bosses where it's like, use the dungeon's item to beat the boss. You got this ball and chain, use the ball and chain. Ooh. And I get that they don't have any specific way to beat them. You can just beat them however. And okay, fine, whatever that aspect, but I agree totally with you visually, where if you told me what does Thunderblight look like, I would not be able to tell you because they look almost identical. That is not something you want when you're trying to create these individual characters and all of that.
Yeah.
And I feel like so much effort went into making this game. Each little NPC has their own story to tell, and then you've got these bosses who are all generic McGee, and it's like, what?
Yeah, it was really
Who was in charge of
surprising.
this?
It seemed like the actual exploration aspect of the game was given the focus, and then the shrines and divine beasts were a bit of an afterthought. Like, it kind of seems that way, to be honest. It's just kind of a lingering thought that I have, that might have been the case. But then there's also Hyrule Castle, and
That was
Hyrule
really
Castle
good.
is
The best dungeon.
it's part of the world. When you enter a divine beast, yes, you can see them from places within the world, but when you get into them, they're like their own section. And I mean, Hyrule Castle, I guess, is kind of like
It
that.
does that too, but not to the same extent. It has to do with the interactivity.
Yeah, exactly. You can climb.
Best case scenario in my mind would be have the option to have someone take you onto the beast, but have a way to do it without even triggering any of that.
Yeah.
Like you just say, oh, that's a cool camel in the distance, I'm gonna climb it. Like, make it super difficult.
It'd be so sweet if you could do that. It would be so cool if, to get to Vamido, you would have to climb to the top of the Rito village and then paraglide to it.
Or even like if there was a nearby mountain that
Yeah.
climbed up over the village and just barely above Vamido and you had to like time it perfectly right to get on. People have done that where like if you do the whole flying car glitch, which by the way I love that, where you stick the metal box in the minecart and you lift it up. It's super hard to control, but I love
amazing.
it. Someone has done that where if you climb up and you try to board onto Vamido or any other divine beast, you physically can't. They don't exist in the world. You just phase straight through them, which kind of sucks because doing something like that, even if it was impossible to do, it would just make it so much more cool and it would fit with the style of the game so much. But instead you have to watch stupid Yunobo.
Oh god.
I don't like that segment at all where you're escorting him up the mountain and you have to avoid the drones and all that. I don't understand the purpose of like, oh, we have to come up with the thimble to have me stop. And it's like, why would I ever have you stop? I stop moving and you stop.
Yunobo is just is an annoying character, and I don't like him.
The worst character in the game. And if you play with voice acting...
Oh yeah, voice acting.
Voice acting in Zelda, I don't mind. The voice acting in Breath of the Wild is not great.
I think, well, okay, so...
There's a few that are good, namely Rivali. Rivali is great.
I'd say Rivali, Urbosa, Daruk. Mifa's okay. I think Zelda's a bit too British. Like, I think it doesn't really fit with the model that they use for Zelda. I don't know. Like, it always seemed a bit
like Zelda
jarring.
She's such a thick, like, posh
It's
British
a fake
accent.
British accent.
Yeah, and then her father doesn't.
The king and the Great Deku Tree, I thought, had good voices as well. Yunobo, I feel like he could have been recast.
The thing is that it breaks every convention of what you'd think a Goron would sound like. Like, obviously, they're gonna sound gruff and like this sometimes, but even, like, if you had a higher Goron where, like, you know how the ones in Ocarina of Time, they're like, whoa?
Yeah.
Like all that. Like, if you had a voice that sounded like that, I'd be totally fine with that. Instead, you get a Yunobo who sounds like this, and hi guys, I've got a scarf and this stupid haircut. Am I cool yet?
I forget what Sidon sounded like.
His voice actor, it wasn't great, but it wasn't bad either. It was just sort of there.
Mhm.
But his best parts are without voice acting, where he poses.
I appreciate that Zelda finally has voice acting. For the most part, the voices are good. I feel like Zelda could have been just a bit toned down with the accent.
Yeah, I'd say the best bit of voice acting that Zelda gets in the game is the opening bits where it's like, Link, find this, Link, find me, goodbye. I like that bit. Everything with cutscenes in her is just like,
But yeah, it's because she's a disembodied voice, and you don't have the
Yeah.
connection to her actual face and character model. Do you guys want to talk about speculation for the DLC pack?
I mean, obviously, it seems to be some sort of flashback.
I don't think so. I think it's not even confirmed that it's after Calamity Ganon.
Is it?
That's what I thought.
Is
yeah.
it?
There's a clip they showed, a 15-second clip of the DLC. Zelda and Link on horses marching, but in the corner of the screen, you can see a shrine that is blue, which means that it's an active shrine. It must take place after Ganon.
Right, because the shrines weren't active before
Yeah.
Link wakes
Right.
up for the second time.
Okay.
Huh. I thought for sure that they wouldn't do that because that causes a lot of problems as far as the game doesn't end, technically speaking. Like, you beat Ganon and it resets you. If that is the case, great. I love like an after story sort of thing. And that's something that I immediately wanted because the ending is not very satisfying when compared to the rest of the game. And that's what I immediately thought when I beat the game was that's it. You don't even get the satisfaction of like seeing what you did.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's not any real big payoff. It's probably also symptomatic of how easy the last fight with Ganon is.
Oh,
Like, we need to talk about
spoiler
this. Yeah,
alert.
spoilers.
Spoilers.
The first phase was cool, but the fact that the, I guess, canonical way that you're supposed to beat him is to get all of the Divine Beasts and it knocks out half of his health, I felt like that was a bit too much and it made the fight really easy. But then Beast Ganon was so easy, and
Such
it's
a
like
joke.
he's static, basically.
And that could have been the best battle ever.
Yeah.
Because you've got this giant thing that's roaming around the cliffside and you're on a horse.
It could have
and it
been
could have been like a race.
full
It
Shadow
could
of the
have been
Colossus, but it wasn't because
Yeah.
you couldn't climb it, and it was like the missed opportunity. It's the final boss, basically. Even previous games, like Twilight Princess, had more going on, even though the end battle wasn't really that hard. It was still like...
It gave the illusion of hardness because there were like so many phases.
It was like a 4-phase battle. It all came to this showdown between you and Ganon. And like this could have been great because you're not in a room, you're actually on Hyrule Field. It could have been this whole thing where maybe to try to set fire onto the entire land, you'd have to actually chase it on your horse. It could have been like the fight with Got in Majora's Mask. You're trying to chase him. The whole dynamic of the fight is different. For most boss fights, they're gonna come at you, but no, you have to go to it.
Shoot arrows at giant glowing targets. Boom, you beat the game.
That being the climax of the game really
That
felt
killed it a lot.
so shallow. I honestly thought that they should have been reversed, Beast Ganon and Calamity Ganon, because then it would have actually been a bit more significant, because taking a half the health of Beast Ganon, it's like whatever, you know, it was already easy, but then you'd have to actually fight Calamity Ganon.
I would say that any fight with the Lionel is harder than the final battle.
Yes.
Yes.
100%.
Really, Ganon should have been a big Lionel.
Yes.
That's what it should have been.
Can the modding community add that in for us, please? Imagine a giant
Oh,
Lionel.
God.
How terrifying would that
That'd be horrible.
For the DLC pack too, though, I think the new dungeon, whatever that might
Fifth
be,
Divine
like, I
Beast,
hope-
LOL.
I'm pretty sure that it won't be a Divine Beast. The way that they've set up the story, it's already, like, set in stone. There's 4 Divine Beasts and there's the Ganons. I don't think there'd be, like, a secret one. I do think if it's a new area that maybe you're transported to, like how you're transported to the Master Trials when you put the Master Sword back in, I think it'll be akin to that. Or maybe an area of the game is expanded upon. There might be some place where you can bomb a wall and it'll lead into this huge labyrinth. I hope that is the case.
The easiest way to that is obviously, like you said, the way that the Master Trials are done, where you get transported to this other realm that isn't connected at all to the map. Whether or not that's the best way to do it, I don't know.
No,
But
I
that
think
would
the
definitely
best
be
way
easiest
would be
way.
to actually integrate it with the world, but then it's also a matter of people that don't have access to the DLC pack. They have an incomplete version of the world, basically. Overall, though, it had been really fun playing it for several hours, but at a point it did get a bit repetitive. I got into a rhythm of being a completionist, you know?
Yep, same.
At that point, it just kind of got a lot less fun, but I still enjoy booting it up and messing around with the mechanics. It's not my favorite Zelda game, though. That still goes to Majora's Mask. I find this game is a good direction for the series. A lot more people have gotten into Zelda. Certain things need more polishing, puzzle design, and dungeons in general, and the side quests, too. I honestly don't get why they weren't, because the other games in the series have better ones. They just need to take more elements from previous titles in the franchise. If they do that for the next Zelda game, I think it'll be a winner.